Welcome. Thank you for joining. Tonight we will meet amazing author Judy Bloomberg, who will talk about her new book, Always a Traveler, Never a Tourist, in search of people and places on the road less traveled. My name is Susan Eastland, and I am on the programming team here at Cary Library. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like tonight's event to you. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel afterwards. We are testing a basic hybrid format tonight, and thank you for everyone's patience as I talk to both the laptop and to you all. Thank you for coming in person. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining in online. We really appreciate it. For those attending in person, there will be time at the end for questions. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker. Judy Bloomberg has been an intrepid traveler for over 50 years. As the Sudbury resident explains, I have always had a passion for adventure, not the kind where you climb Mount Everest to prove to yourself and the world that you have amazing endurance and ability to withstand cold, but the around the world in 80 days kind of adventure, the kind where you set off for countries whose names you can't even pronounce, to explore other cultures and other peoples, and to learn how we are different, and perhaps even more importantly, how we are the same. She also has a long-standing love of traditional cultures that has led her to explore tribal communities all over the world. In fact, she sometimes calls herself a closet anthropologist. At last count, she visited about 115 countries. Maybe that's updated now.
Well, I had never been to Jordan before, so
All right.
I just added one more.
It's updated. On all 7 continents. Some of her most memorable experiences include attending a giant gathering of about 200 different tribes in Papua New Guinea, having a random encounter and delightful conversation with the Queen Mother in Bhutan, staying overnight as an honored guest in the yurt of a famous eagle hunter in Mongolia, scaling a mountain in Uganda to spend time with a family of elusive mountain gorillas, and visiting the remote explorer hunts in Antarctica, which have been left virtually untouched since explorers like Scott and Shackleton abandoned them over 100 years ago. So, what is an intrepid traveler to do when sidelined by COVID? Judy returned from her last trip to Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, and Qatar in March 2020, less than a week before the US completely shut down. Stuck at home, she began curating her collection of thousands of travel photos, selecting the ones she considered most interesting and most depictive of life in the less traveled corners of the world. After a bit of prodding from her friends, she finally agreed that the photos would make a compelling book. Her book, Always a Traveler, Never a Tourist, in search of people and places on the road less traveled, a collection of 294 of her best photos from those trips, focuses on the most exotic destinations on all 7 continents and the people who inhabit them. Please join me in welcoming Judy Bloomberg, and I'm going to share the screen one moment. All right, Judy, take it away.
Thanks very much, Susan. Okay, so welcome to everybody. I'm really glad to be here. One of the things I like almost as much as traveling is talking about traveling. So thank you, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have anybody to talk to about traveling. Program's going to basically have 2 parts. I'm going to start out with about 10 minutes of talking about my travel experiences over the last 50 years, different ways that you can approach traveling, not being on a tour group, but getting out and seeing things outside the typical tourist experience. And then after that, I'm going to talk about my book, Always a Traveler, Never a Tourist, in search of people and places on the road less traveled. And I obviously could not discuss every one of the 115 plus countries I've been to. So instead, I focused on some of the least known places, the off the beaten path destinations and the people who live there. I'm going to show you about 100 photos. Some of them are in my book. Some of them are not in my book. I won't tell you which are which. And I'll tell you a little bit about the countries they represent and a few anecdotes about my experiences there. And then when that's all over, I'll give you guys a chance to ask questions. So, as Susan said, I've always had this passion for adventure, the around the world in 80 days kind of adventure, not the climbing Mount Everest kind of adventure. And one of the things that really interests me is looking at people in other cultures and trying to explore how they're different, but also how they're the same. Because when you get down to the nitty-gritty, we really are the same in a whole lot of different ways. My first foray into travel adventures was over 50 years ago on my honeymoon with my husband, Mark. At the time, the typical way to take a honeymoon was to find the most luxurious Caribbean resort available and stay there for a week. But a week on the beach just didn't sound like the trip of a lifetime. So instead, we opted for 10 weeks in Europe, following the advice of Europe on $5 a day, which some of you may remember. It was a budget travel Bible of its day. We had no advanced reservations. We just rented a car and headed off, to the great chagrin of our parents, who in those days before internet and cell phones had no real way to get in touch with us. And I didn't appreciate what I was doing to them until I became a parent. And you realize the anxiety that probably created for them. We just gave them a sense of our theoretical itinerary and told them to send us a letter, care of the American Express offices in various cities if they needed to reach us. That's how it was done back in 1970. And every Sunday, we went to the local post office to call home by means of a very cumbersome overseas operator process. In the late 1970s, we stretched our cultural understanding even further by beginning person-to-person visits. First, we participated in Friendship Force, which was an intercultural city-to-city exchange program created by Jimmy Carter. Boston was chosen for an exchange with Hamburg, and we ended up hosting a lovely young German couple in our home for 10 days. With the liberal use of a German-English dictionary, we got well beyond the typical superficial conversations to discuss serious topics and share real feelings. Our positive experience with Friendship Force led us to get involved with Servas, which is an organization, it still exists, whose members host each other in their homes for 2-day periods. And also, we hosted a Japanese exchange student in our home for 6 months when our kids were in high school. We still participate in Servas over 4 decades later, and we've stayed with families from all over the world, from South Africa to New Zealand, Indonesia, Japan, Italy, and others, as well as hosting many international families in our home in Sudbury. 1987 was our first visit to a real adventure destination. Mark, my husband, decided that he wanted to go on a cruise. So I started looking at cruise destinations. And in the process, I discovered it was possible to take a cruise to the Amazon. That sounded way more interesting than the Caribbean. So we booked passage on a small boat with about 10 or 12 cabins on the Napo River, which is a tributary of the Amazon in Ecuador. Along the way, we became familiar with local tribes, piranhas, and 12-inch white spiders. We finished the trip off with a visit to the Galapagos well before the mainstream tourists had discovered it. And then came Epcot. No, Epcot was not the adventure. Epcot was where we hatched the adventure. We were eating lunch in the restaurant at the French Village. I said to Mark, "This is so quaint. Wouldn't it be great to live in France?" He was supposed to say, "That's crazy. We have jobs and lives here in Boston." Instead, he said, "Okay, sounds good to me." So we quit our jobs, rented a house in a tiny village an hour and a half south of Paris, and proceeded to live the year in Provence life, except that this was Burgundy and not Provence. It was 2002. I've always said that that year changed my life. And I still measure things as before France or after France. I never imagined that we would become a real part of a community in rural France, but we did. I volunteered at the local nursery school once a week. And on Fridays, I took long hikes in the forest with my newfound friends from the town. We went to dinner parties at other people's houses and invited neighbors to dine at our house as well. We attended town-wide soirees, including a New Year's Eve party that lasted until 6 a.m. And of course, we ate at every gourmet French restaurant we could find. We were so glad that we had decided to live in a small village instead of Paris, because in Paris, we would have always been treated like tourists, even after a year. But in Champigny-sur-Yonne, we were accepted as part of the community. When we came home, I had a new skill, fluent French, which I parlayed into a new career as a high school French teacher. But I still wanted to up my game. Since living in France with Mark had allowed me to speak far too much English, I left him home the following summer and went back to France to live with a French family and attend classes with French teachers from Spain, Germany, Holland, Bulgaria, Denmark, and other European countries. He wasn't that happy about it, but he's a good guy. He let me do it. We formed a tight-knit group as we compared French teaching around the world and even learned to tell what country a person was from by their accent when they were speaking French. So, there was a lady from Bulgaria, there was a lady from Spain. They spoke French in a very different manner. 2008 was a start of another shift in our travel style. We started doing home exchanges, where we stayed in the home of a family in another country at the same time that they stayed in our home. So far, we've done about 10 of them to France, Italy, Ireland, Holland, Singapore, and Australia. But the first was by far the most interesting of the lot because we stayed in an actual French chateau. We never figured out why people who lived in a chateau would want to stay at our house, but we weren't inclined to complain. The chateau had a grand ballroom, so the owners rented it out for wedding receptions as a side business. On Saturday afternoons, we would come home to find the caterers setting up. We would go to bed to the strains of lively dance music and awake at 7 a.m. to find that the caterers were still there cleaning up. The French definitely like to end their parties late. In recent years, we've added humanitarian volunteer work to the mix, doing good while seeing the world. We've made 3 trips to Haiti to work with NGOs, visited a remote school in the Gambia, taught English classes in Ethiopia, Indonesia, and Laos, and offered our help to a remarkable community of Jews in Gondar, Ethiopia. Along the way, I've attended incredible tribal festivals and religious celebrations in places like Papua New Guinea, Ethiopia, Brazil, and Bhutan. I've attended local weddings, coming of age ceremonies, and even a baptism in Papua New Guinea, officiated by both a Protestant deacon and a witch doctor. I stayed with local families in their yurts, mud huts, and other traditional accommodations. As Susan said, I had the privilege of engaging in a lovely conversation with the Queen Mother of Bhutan, who speaks perfect English, when I happened to enter a temple where she had been praying. I've flown over Mount Everest, seen millions of penguins in Antarctica, clawed my way up a mountain to spend time with a family of mountain gorillas, and even swum in a lake in Ecuador that was filled with piranhas. Secret about piranhas: they don't eat you if they have something better to eat. You're not their first favorite food. The second thing is you always let the guide go in the water first. I think of myself as a citizen of the world. One of the things I find meaningful about travel off the beaten path is that I get to see how people really live and what they really think, not what the American news media tells me they do and think. It also makes me appreciate my life of privilege as an American. Every time I think I have something to complain about, like stores empty of toilet paper or now baby formula, I think of people I've met in third world countries, and I feel very lucky indeed. So that's my 50 years of very exciting and unusual experiences. Now I will go on and show you a number of pictures from the book. They're divided by country, and at the beginning of each section, there's a map, so I can explain to you, for those of you who don't know, where these places actually are. Okay, there is my book. There are copies of it over there. I'm hoping that some of you might want to buy one at the end of my talk. It's also available on Amazon if you are inclined to do that. All right, so we're going to start with Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is located there. Okay, Papua New Guinea is located just north of Australia and south of Indonesia. It actually shares the island of New Guinea with part of Indonesia. The western part is called West Papua and is part of Indonesia. The eastern part became an independent country in 1975. The thing about Papua New Guinea that's kind of interesting is for a long, long time, there were parts of it that knew nothing about the outside world, and the outside world knew nothing about them. The area around the edges, the coast of Papua New Guinea, was discovered by prospectors, by traders who came by sea and so on. But there's this whole interior part around the area that says Mount Hagen, the highlands, where these people, there were 1 million people living there. And they thought they were the only people in the world until 1937, when a group of prospectors who had kind of given up on finding gold and silver near the coast went into the interior. They found the people saw them. The people had never seen a white person before. They thought that they were the ghosts of their ancestors. They came because the people in 1937, there were no roads, but there were planes. So they came down in a plane from the sky. These tribal people looked at them and they said, these are white people who came from the sky. They must be our dead ancestors. And the only thing that convinced them otherwise was that one day they actually saw one of the men relieving himself in the woods, and he dropped his pants and they went, oh, he doesn't look like a ghost. So that was how they figured that one out. Oops. Yeah. Okay, so first we're going to look at the Huli people who are in this central area that was not discovered until 1937. The thing that's interesting about the Huli people is that the men grow their hair and then they make them into wigs. So they either grow their hair for 18 months to make a small wig or for 36 months to make a big wig. This man is wearing a big wig. And while they're growing their hair, they live in these special communities, wig schools, they call them, with other men who are growing their hair. And they do all kinds of special treatments and rituals around the growing of the hair. And then they cut it off and make these wigs. Okay, these are some men who are at a wig school. You can see their hair is not as big as the first guy, but it's getting there, and you can see how carefully it's shaped and so on. And that's a traditional kind of outfit that they wear with the red apron with the feather things at the end. Okay, this is another Huli wig man, slightly different. He actually is not wearing a wig of hair. His is made of bird's nest material. This is a Huli woman and her child, and you get a little bit of a sense of what the huts in that area look like. And this is another Huli man. So you can see there is some variation, and he does have a quill through his nose. In all of my travels, I never saw anyone with a bone through their nose, but I have seen people with quills through their nose. I think this is a cassowary quill. This is moving to another part of Papua New Guinea called Tufi, which is along the coast. And that's an area that was known to the outside for far longer. And you can see they dress differently, but also very colorfully. And the young women paint their faces in a very specific manner. These are the Asaro mudmen. What they do is they make these masks out of clay, which they stick on their heads, and then they cover their bodies with clay. They did this originally to scare their enemies into thinking that they were spirits. Spirits play a big part in Papua New Guinea and the tribes. So you can see what those masks look like, and they just stick them on over their heads. This is still Papua New Guinea. We're in the area of the Sepik River. And this is a typical canoe. You know, it's just basically a log that fell down and they dig it out minimally. And you can see that the kids really do wear grass skirts, or leaves. That's their typical attire. And this is what some of the houses look like around the Sepik River. Now, this is the beginning of a section on the Garoka Shop. So let me talk a little bit about the Garoka Shop. There are several big festivals that happen in Papua New Guinea. And probably the biggest is called the Garoka Shop. Takes place in an area called Garoka. And the way it started, there was a point before they gained independence in 1975 when Papua New Guinea was controlled by Australia. And they had a very difficult time managing all these hundreds of different tribes who were constantly fighting with each other over pigs, over women, over everything. So the Australians came up with this great idea. They would have a festival, and they would allow each tribe to showcase its best costumes, its best dances, its best songs. And so they got these, 200 or so tribes together and had this big festival. There was only one problem. Instead of promoting world peace or Papua New Guinea peace, they fought with each other even more, because if you got number one, that tribe wanted to know why they didn't get number one. So the Australians, after a few years, realized what was going on, and now they do it strictly as a showcase, for them to show off, but they don't give prizes anymore. However, there's probably about 200 tourists that come, maybe, and probably about 3,000 or 4,000 local people. So it's not something that's put on for the benefit of tourists, although a few lucky tourists go, but it's really something that happens for the locals. So I'll go through these relatively quickly, but just to give you a sense of what some of the different tribes look like, what their costumes and face painting and so on are like. This is a woman. I thought it looked kind of like a man, but it's not. Okay, these are one of the groups that are putting on a dance for the other people. These people are wearing face paint that represents the flag of Papua New Guinea. So the black and the red and the yellow down the nose, and if you look carefully on the part that's red, you see some yellow stuff. That's a bird of paradise, which is representative of Papua New Guinea. Okay, I wish I could tell you what the names of all these tribes are, but I can't. But you can see the diversity. This guy is pretending to be a warrior, but he's not really very dangerous. Here's another one that I kind of thought was a man, but is not. Now, this guy is interesting. We're moving into a different area of Papua New Guinea now, called Simbai. And in Simbai, there's a tribe called the Kalam. And the Kalam wear these giant headdresses. You would think that these are green beads, but they're not. They are shells of a particular kind of beetle that lives in the area. And they gather these beetles and get rid of everything but the shell, and then they make these headdresses. They have a festival called the Kalam Culture Festival. And when I said, there were maybe 200 people that attended the Garoka show, there were maybe 20, maybe 25 people who went to the Kalam, who were foreigners who went to the Kalam Culture Festival. And it was interesting because it's almost like you can't get there from here. There are no normal airlines that would fly to that part of Papua New Guinea. So in order to get there, we had to fly on MAP, I believe, which is Missionary Air, forget what the P stands for, but it's basically, there's an airline that runs all over the world that takes missionaries to very out of the way places. And that's the airplane, the company that we had to use to get to the Callum Culture Festival, but it was worth it. Okay, these are also kids who are part of the Callum Culture Festival. I like this little guy. He's got the green headdress too, but he hasn't quite grown into it. Now this is a woman making sausages. One of the things they do at this festival is they slaughter a whole bunch of pigs. So then after they slaughter the pigs, they cut them open, they make a big feast. And this woman, has pulled out the intestines and she's going to stuff it and make sausages. All right, so moving on now, we're going to Ethiopia. And if you look on the left, you can see where in Ethiopia, where in Africa Ethiopia is. It's what's called the Horn of Africa. And it's surrounded by some very sort of scary places like Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea. This is a part of the world that's really worth visiting, but they've had struggles forever and ever. There's always ethnic fighting. It's the only place I ever went where I actually left my itinerary with the State Department. Nothing happened, but I felt I was a little bit nervous about going to that part of the world. So one thing that's interesting about Ethiopia is it's got a north, a south, an east, and a west, as most countries do. But every part of Ethiopia is completely different. So in the north, they've got Coptic Christians who are not practicing the kind of Christianity that you guys are familiar with, but Christianity as it was practiced, back in the 1st century. And it hasn't really changed much. In the east, there's one of the cities that was one of the most important Muslim cities in the world back in the 12th century. In the south, there are all kinds of animist tribes. And in the west is more like natural animals and things like that. So this is the north. And the place is called Lalibela. And one of the things that's interesting about Lalibela, there was a king, his name was King Lalibela. And this was round about the 11th century, when the Crusaders were in Jerusalem, but the infidels, the Arabs, had Jerusalem. So you couldn't go to, if you were a Christian, you couldn't go to Jerusalem. So King Lalibela decided he was going to recreate Jerusalem right there in Ethiopia. And they built these churches that they carved directly into the rock. So this is the Church of St. George in Lalibela, and it looks like a cross. You're looking at the top of the church. This is what the bottom of the church looks like. And so if you climb down into the hole, if you go down the ramp or whatever, you get to an actual church that is several stories high, but the top is absolutely flat with the main ground. We were in Lalibela during the festival of Jannah, which is Ethiopian Christmas, Coptic Christian Ethiopian Christmas. And these are various priests who are doing their thing. And these are another group of priests who are kind of taking a rest, but they do chanting and singing and religious stuff like all through the entire night. It just goes and goes and goes, and huge numbers of people come from all over the country to be in Lalibela for Christmas, for Jannah. Here's some other pilgrims. This is Addis Ababa, the capital. This is not Christmas. This is Timkat, which is Ethiopian Epiphany. And you can see that these guys in the middle are carrying something on their heads. This is a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ethiopians actually believe that the real Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia, in a town called Aksum. And part of the reason they believe that is their understanding is that their first king, King Menelik, was the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And they had a child who became the king. And when he got old enough, King Menelik went to Israel, the Holy Land, and he brought back the Ark of the Covenant and stored it away in Aksum. Now, I haven't seen it, I don't know of any tourists that have, but that is what they say. And so when they celebrate Epiphany, Timkat, they have these things. That's not the real Ark of the Covenant, but that to them is representative of the Ark of the Covenant. Now we're moving now to the south of Ethiopia, which, as I said, is a whole lot of animist tribes who are living very much as they did, for centuries and millennia. And you can see they're very big into face painting, body painting. I believe this is the Nyangatam tribe, and this as well. This is me with some people from the Nyangatam tribe. This is a man from the Hammer tribe. The Hammer tribe is kind of noteworthy for the fact that they color, the men don't do it, but the women color their faces with a kind of an ochre paint and their hair as well, with like an ochre and fat mixed with fat. It gives them a very orangey red color. What the man is holding, he's holding two things that are interesting. One is, you may notice he's holding a gun. They carry, because this is a kind of a dangerous country. And so they carry guns around a lot. And the other is this big bowl that he's holding. And what they do is they make coffee in that. They don't make coffee the way we make coffee. They basically make it out of the shells of the coffee beans. Sorry about that. All right, as I was saying, this is a woman of the Hammer tribe who, you can see that kind of orange color that's from the ochre paint. And she is sitting and watching a coming of age ceremony, which I'll show you the man who's becoming a man in a second. Basically, what happens is they do something called jumping the bull when a man in this tribe gets old enough. And it's very unusual. They get 5 bulls side by side, they line them up, tie them together. The man strips down in front of the entire community, completely naked. And then he climbs up on top of the first bull, runs across the back of the other bulls, and gets down. And then he's a man. So there he is. I did not show you the completely naked one, but trust me, behind that cow, behind that bull, he is wearing no clothes. Okay, this is me with the Hammer tribe. We stayed overnight with a family, and it sat around the campfire, so to speak, at night with the kids, and I taught them things like head, shoulders, knees, and toes, and the alphabet song in English, and they thought I was pretty cool. All right, this is something called the Mercy tribe, and you may have heard of these people. You can see how their lips are stretched. They cut the outside of the lip, stretch it, stretch it, stretch it, stretch it, and then they slip in, there are 3-inch discs, 5-inch discs, and even 7-inch discs. How they eat, I don't know. And here's another woman with an unusual headdress, and also she's got a slightly smaller lip disc. And here's another person from the Mercy tribe. These guys are also from the Mercy tribe. It's a bunch of kids, except for one of them, they are all not wearing any clothes. One kid's wearing a pair of shorts. But what they do instead of clothes is they decorate their bodies with paint. And if you weren't looking really closely, you might not even really realize that they were wearing no clothes. This is me teaching in Ethiopia. I'm teaching a class, like an hour-long English class. You might notice some people have picked up on the fact that everybody in here is a boy. Girls don't get a whole lot of attention in that part of the world. And also some of them seem much more interested in the camera, which my husband is holding, than they are in me. All right, I told you that the eastern part was Muslim, and the town of Harar in the 12th century was on the Silk Road, and it was like one of the major trade cities. It's a walled city. It still has something like 100 mosques inside the walls, and they live not like the people, the animist tribes in the south, but still they live a very traditional lifestyle. And you can see a little bit of that. This is me in Harar with a hyena on my back. This guy who's holding the stick, his family has been doing this for 70 years. These hyenas are wild hyenas. They're not domesticated. They go out, they hunt, they do everything. But for 70 years, his family every night has been feeding them. And they know to come as soon as it gets dark, like 8:30 maybe, to come, and he will give them meat on a stick. And if they want the meat on the stick, they can't eat the tourists. So I put this in the same category as when I said I went swimming with piranhas in South America, but always let the guide do it first. So I waited for a couple of other people to have the hyena on their back before I was willing to risk doing that myself. All right, moving into Uganda, the thing that, and you can see where in Africa Uganda is located. That's my one picture of Uganda. We climbed up in Windy National Park. It's an extremely difficult climb. So you hired guides, and I hired one guy under this arm, one guy under this arm, and he practically pulled me up the mountain. You get to the top, you get to stay there for an hour. What they do is they send trackers out they only send out 8 people in a group. So there'll be like a group of gorillas and 8 people can go to that group. In Uganda, there are 3 groups of 8 gorillas, which means 3 groups of 8 people can go each day. They send a tracker out before who figures out where the gorillas are to speed things up. And then when you get there, you get to sit and just stay still. You can't go near them, but they can go near you. So you hope that they will find you interesting. All right, Senegal and the Gambia. You can see on the map that it is the very western part of Africa. And the thing that's interesting about Senegal and the Gambia is this is where almost 100% of slaves came to the United States because it's the closest part to the United States. They weren't necessarily all gathered from Senegal and the Gambia, but that was their point of departure. If you look at it on the right, the map on the right, you see this big green thing, that's Senegal. And then you see this little kind of pink thing in the middle, which is the Gambia. So how did that happen? Basically, it used to be French West Africa. The British and the French fought over it. The British got control of the river, which is called the Gambia River. They ended up settling and they said, okay, British, you can keep the river and like 2 or 3 miles on either side. We, the French, we're going to keep Senegal, which is the whole rest of the country. So that's kind of how that works. And these are just women. You can see they have a very kind of traditional form of dress. They have the headdresses and so on. This is an indication of what I talked about, that this is really where the slave trade was based. And this is me at a school in the Gambia with a lot of kids from the school who were very excited to see foreigners who didn't look like them. This is what a bus looks like in the Senegal. And they're very brightly painted. If you go to Haiti, you see the same sort of thing, these, very brightly painted and often with things on there that refer, in Haiti, they'll have messages that refer to Jesus. Here they have messages that refer to Allah or some aspect of Islam, because Senegal is a Muslim country. Okay, moving into Morocco, which is just across the Mediterranean, Straits of Gibraltar from Spain. I love this one. This, for those of you who don't read French, it says Timbuktu, 52 days, through the Sahara on a camel. I did not go for 52 days, but I love the sign. This was Mohammed. He was our guide into the Sahara Desert. And he made us a lovely lunch in the desert. And he stopped at the butcher shop. And that's what the butcher shop looks like in Morocco. We ate the meat. We didn't die from it, but it was probably not super sanitary. And there's Mohammed preparing lunch for us. All right, moving on to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, which are all very close together. This is the area called Sapa in Vietnam. And there are lots of ethnic tribes in the Sapa, which is a mountainous area. These are women from the Flower Hmong tribe, and I love their outfits. And I own one of those bags. Actually, I own 3 of them. They were $5 a piece, and I insisted on buying as many as I could. This is a woman in Hoi An. It was very difficult for me to go to Vietnam because I was a child of Vietnam. I was of the age when I was in college when people I knew were getting sent to fight in Vietnam. And it's a little bit like my parents had trouble going with the idea of going to Germany because that was their era. Vietnam was my era. But when I finally went there, it's a wonderful country. I would go back in a minute. This is Laos, and this is street food. It is crickets and grubs, and they fry them and eat them. And surprisingly, my husband thinks they're tasty. I have eaten them. They're edible. They're a very good source of protein. I would not order it in a restaurant, but he goes out of his way. He thinks they're good. This is Project COPE. And one of the things that people don't realize about Laos is that in the time of the Vietnam War, in the early 1970s, we dropped more ordnance, more bombs on Laos than were dropped in all of World War II. I had no idea until I went there. And a very large percentage of it is still there and unexploded. You might remember Princess Diana was very involved in trying to get rid of landmines and stuff. Well, there's a lot of them left in Laos rather. This organization called Project COPE devotes itself to helping people who have lost limbs because they were farmers and all of a sudden their plow hit a landmine, or little kids who find a mine and try to play ball with it or something. So they give them prosthetic limbs and they teach them to use them. I talk a lot about how we're different and how we're the same. These are a couple of monks, young monks, and many kids become monks because it's a way of having education. It doesn't mean that they're going to be a monk forever. They're a monk for 5 years or 8 years or something like that. But this was just before the time of COVID. And there they are in their monk's robes wearing their COVID masks, just like us. This is northern Thailand, which is my favorite part of Thailand. This is a woman who is in the Akha tribe, and she's gathering leaves and plants and stuff. This is a woman we stayed with. We stayed in her house, which is basically what you see is what you get. It's like a thatched roof thing. But we did stay overnight with her. And that's another view of the house. And this is me riding elephants bareback. We went to an elephant camp called the Thai Elephant Conservation Center. And we took a mahout training course. Mahouts are the people who train elephants. So we learned stay there for 2 nights and learn to be elephant trainers and learn to ride bareback and to bathe the elephants in the river. This is also in the north, not in Chiang Mai, but Chiang Rai, which is another province in the north of Thailand. This is called the White Temple. And I love it because it looks like it should be a topper for a wedding cake. Oops. All right, now we're into Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, which is also in the south. If you look on the right, you see it's actually right next to Thailand and Laos. That was the last place we visited before COVID happened. And Myanmar is an interesting country because it's had this military junta thing going on off and on for years. It was controlled by the British when it was Burma, and then the military took over. And then most of you probably know Aung San Suu Kyi took over for a brief period of time and then got out. We seem to have gone in that sweet spot between when Aung San Suu Kyi came in and before they kicked her out, which was very lucky. I don't know if it would be so easy to go back now. And we also went to some areas that were where you had to get special permits. This is called Golden Rock, and it's very cool. It is covered with gold leaf, which it's considered one of the most important Buddhist, Burmese Buddhist religious sites. And the religious men, and it is men, not women, they get gold leaf and they go as a sign of devotion. They put the gold leaf on the rock. So that's why that rock is so golden. And they say that one of the things that makes this rock special is that it is balanced. It doesn't fall down because it's balanced on one of the Buddha's hairs. So I'm not sure where the hair is, but supposedly it is underneath there. Again, I've talked about how we're different, how we're the same. These are young monks in Myanmar eating ice cream cones. Every once in a while you see these things, you think that people are so different, but they're not. This is not Inlay Lake, I'm sorry, the Irrawaddy River. And these guys are carrying lunch to the kids at the school. They cook up rice in one part of the village, and then they carry it down to the school for the kids to eat. How we're different, how we're the same. This lady is what's called the long neck Padang, or the Kia tribe. And she's wearing these neck rings, which are very heavy. I tried them on. They're really heavy, and the kids wear them from the time they're little kids. But look at her. Her son is wearing, I'm not sure whose face is on the front of his t-shirt. He's got a cell phone. He's got a modern watch, and she's got heavy gold neck rings and face painting. Mongolia. Mongolia is an interesting place. It's about the size of France, Germany, Italy, Spain, most of Western Europe put together. It's a very big landmass. It's got 3 million people in it. And of those 3 million people, 1.5 million live in the capital called Ulaanbaatar, which means that the entire whole rest of the country's got 1.5 million people. And think of like going for 50 or 100 miles, seeing nothing, and then seeing a yurt. And then going for another 25 miles and you see a couple more yurts. That's what Mongolia is like. It's located between China and Russia. We got there by taking the Trans-Siberian Express from Moscow, which took us 4 days. So we went forth to time. We often try and time our trips to match up with festivals. And there's the most important festival in Mongolia is called the Nadam Festival. And it's based on archery, wrestling, and horsemanship. Those are the 3 kinds of events they have competition in. The people normally dress in Western dress, but for Nadam, they put on the clothing of their ancestors. They all run around in traditional clothing. And it's not something they do for tourists, it's something they do for themselves. So here's a little girl in her traditional dress and a little boy. And this guy's in a different tribe from Mongolia. Now this is Western Mongolia. This is Ardak. We stayed in his yurt. Ardak is a famous eagle hunter. He wins all kinds of competitions, and he took us eagle hunting on horses. It was more demonstration than actual eagle hunting, but we did go with him. And he lives in this yurt with his whole family. We stayed in the yurt with him. They're actually called gers, G-E-R, but we call them yurts. We stayed in Ardak's yurt. There were 11 of us. It was me, my husband, the guide, the driver, So that was 4, and 7 people from Ardak's family, all in a one-room yurt, which had no toilet facilities, not even an outhouse. And if you needed to use the toilet, you went out of sight down in the ravine. That's how they do things. That's what Ardak's yurt looked like. They do a lot of riding on horses, but he also had a motorcycle. And this is the inside of his yurt. It's beautiful inside. It's decorated with all kinds of rugs and things. That's Ardak, some of Ardak's kids, and that's my husband showing them their own pictures that he had taken with the iPad. And they were fascinated. Well, the girl was more fascinated with the camera, but the young boys liked seeing their pictures. And this is dung. There's lots of yaks and horses and all kinds of animals that produce dung. What they do is they pile it up and they use it for fuel. That's what they cook with. That's what they heat their houses with. Okay, this is another horseman in Western Mongolia. And these are ladies at the Kazakh wedding, the infamous Kazakh wedding. This part of Mongolia is just abuts Kazakhstan. So most of the people who live there are ethnically Kazakh. And our guide said to us one night, would you like to go to a Kazakh wedding? And we naively thought, oh, it's going to be a demonstration Kazakh wedding. They're going to show us how they used to do wedding. No, the guide had a friend who was getting married and we were invited to the wedding. So it was 300 Kazakhs and my husband and I. And we were celebrities. I mean, we were almost as much celebrities as the bride and groom. And my husband won a dance contest, which is a trick when you're in Kazakhstan. So these are some of the ladies who were guests at the wedding. And this is us. You can see me at the table with some of my best friends. And you can get a sense of what the 300 people looked like. They didn't speak English. They knew 2 words. Okay, thank you. And they were very into vodka. So we did many, many toasts with vodka. And one of the guys would bang the empty glass on the table and he'd say, okay, they'd fill up the glass with vodka and he'd go, thank you. And everybody would take a drink. We got very drunk. And as I said, they put my husband up to be in a dance contest and they set things up so that he won. This is Genghis Khan vodka. That's their favorite kind of vodka because, as you know, Genghis Khan was like their moment in the sun. So it was a long time ago, but that's when they had their glory. So they still revere Genghis Khan. Okay, Bhutan. Bhutan, which is between China and India, for those of you who don't know, in the Himalayas. This is a festival called the Korra Festival, and these young monks are doing their religious thing. This is a festival that very few Westerners get to because most people who go to Bhutan, there's only one international airport in Bhutan, and it's in the west, in a place called Taro. So people normally fly into Taro, they'll drive halfway into the country and then back to Taro. So they never get to the eastern part of the country. We had a very smart tour person who arranged, he said, you can fly into India, to Guwahati, India. And it's only 2 hours from the Bhutanese border. So that's what we did. And they came, picked us up, drove us 2 hours, and we got to go to this Korra festival, which was way on the eastern end. This is called a tanka. It's a painting, a religious painting that they enroll during these festivals. This is a masked dancer at one of the festivals. A couple of kids having their lunch. And again, it's how are we different? How are we the same? Take a look at the little tractor, steam shovel, whatever it is, that's by his side. They're all wearing these things that look like robes. They're called gos, and they are obligated to wear them. If they're in their workplace, they have to wear that kind of traditional attire. This is my husband being hit over the head with a wooden phallus. They're very into fertility in Bhutan, and this clown person was hitting my husband over the head to try and make us, have more children. Of course, we were like 65 years old at the time. And oops, as I said, they're very into fertility. And these are paintings on the side of the house that are exactly what you think they are. This is me and my husband in a place called Tiger's Nest, which is a monastery way, way up in the mountains. You have to practically kill yourself to get up there. But once you get up, it's an amazing view. Okay, Indonesia, which is north of Papua New Guinea. You guys know what those are? Komodo dragons, only found in the island of Komodo. They're about 10 feet long. Most of the time, they sit in the sun and don't bother people. They're more likely to attack animals than people, but they can attack people. They kill people, they kill animals or people more with poison in their saliva than with the actual bite. So they'll bite an animal and then inject the venom, essentially. But as long as you go around with a guide, it's perfectly safe. This is a place called Taro on the island of Flores in Indonesia. And we stayed with a family, and the family took us hunting for dinner. This was dinner. These are bamboo worms. We found them in the bamboo tree, and then they took them home and sauteed them. As I said, my husband likes bugs. I like them a little bit less. And these are the women from the village of Taro. This is how they bathe. One thing that's interesting about the island of Flores is we have Homo sapiens and Cro-Magnon man. There's actually something called Homo floresiensis, an old, early form of man that came specifically from this island of Flores in Indonesia. I never knew. Okay, India. Everybody knows, I think, where India is, south of China. We've been to northern India, but we liked southern India much more. It's very different. Here's a guy in the city of Madurai making sugarcane juice, which is very delicious. And here's a guy in front of his shop just taking a rest. This guy doing his thing on the side of the road. And I love the saris, they're just beautiful. So in the south of India, in the province called Kerala, it's mostly canals and swampland. And one of the big things that one can do there is to rent one of these houseboats for like 2 or 3 days. And they take you through the canals and you get to see how people are living their lives. And it's very nice. It comes with like a crew of 4 and you. So here's people doing their wash in the river. All right, Peru. Everybody, I think, knows where Peru is in South America. This is Lake Titicaca. And in the middle of Lake Titicaca, there's something called the Oros Islands, which are floating, man-made floating islands. And the people who live on those islands go back and forth in boats that look like this. And this is one of the people who live on one of the islands. You can see they're all made of like reeds. And they make these giant mats of reeds and tie them together and then anchor them to the bottom of the lake. These are also women this is the island of Amantani in Peru. And this is on the road to Colca Canyon, but you can see just the colorful dress that they have. Finally, Antarctica. Everybody knows where Antarctica is. So most people who go to Antarctica go from Ushuaia, which is at the tip of Argentina. They go down to the Antarctic Peninsula, which actually is not even below the Antarctic Circle. But that's where most people go, and then they come back to Ushuaia. And if you live near Australia, sometimes you leave from New Zealand, from Bluff, New Zealand, go down to a different part of Antarctica and come back. But there's only one ship that I know of, maybe there's another, but it's the only one we found, that goes, it semi-circumnavigates, starts in Argentina, ends up in New Zealand. And it takes about 31 days. And for most of that time, there's no one but that ship for maybe 500 miles around. I mean, you are really in the middle of no place. So this is the beginning of the trip. You can see the ice really is blue. If you've heard that ice, glacial ice is blue. This is in Antarctica near the Argentina side. This is Antarctica near the New Zealand side. This is Shackleton's hut. And the thing that's interesting about these explorer huts, the Shackleton and Scott, and a number of other explorers, most of them left in a really big hurry because they were stranded. And when somebody finally came to rescue them, they didn't worry about packing up their toothbrushes. So it's been left exactly as it was in 1909. And you can see there are people, there's still socks hanging on the line. There's still meat packed in tins that were left. There's toothbrushes. There's all kinds of personal items that were just left exactly as it was. And then finally, we did not see emperor penguins in Antarctica because generally the emperor penguins are offshore on ice floes. This is the Falkland Islands, and these are king penguins, which look just like emperor penguins, except they're maybe a foot shorter. And they were very impressive. And that's it. This is my book, which, as I said, I hope some of you will buy. It is available here, and it is also available on Amazon. And if you want to buy it and don't have money with you tonight and want to get an autographed copy from me, you can send me an email and I will get one to you at the discounted price. It is substantially discounted if you get it directly from me. And that is it. And I would love to have any questions that you guys want to ask.
Thank you everyone so much for tuning in. We have recorded this talk, and so it will be available on the YouTube channel in a week or so if anyone's missed anything. Thank you to Judy for speaking with us and everyone who tuned in, and have a good evening, everyone.